How in the heck does a 5-seeded BYU actually end up as a 6 seed? Allow me to explain as BYU gets ready to take on the Duquesne Dukes in Omaha.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, the motto is your team every day, and as such, this is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU sports, and we are brought to you today by our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stake wager for your business. That's why LinkedIn helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, as you heard in the open, the BYU Cougars are a 5 seed, but also a 6 seed in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, and they will obviously be taking on the Duquesne Dukes in Omaha, Nebraska on Thursday morning Mountain Time. It's 12:40 Eastern Time. Looking forward to this overall. So I'm very excited, first off, to say the BYU is in the NCAA men's basketball tournament for now a 31st time in their program's history. Now, they have the dubious distinction of being the team that has the most NCAA tournament appearances without a Final Four appearance. Obviously, those 31 appearances have only resulted in one Elite Eight berth, I believe 2 Sweet 16s, but nonetheless, BYU will be chasing some history once again this weekend. But BYU is the 17th rated team according to the NCAA selection committee, or the 17th overall seed in the NCAA tournament. So how in the world does what would typically be the top rated 5 seed in the NCAA men's basketball tournament end up with the Cougars ultimately being a 6 seed playing in Omaha, Nebraska? Well, for all intents and purposes, BYU's no Sunday play policy is why BYU got slotted on the 6 line versus being slotted on the 5 line. And the reason why is either the current alignment of the brackets, whether it was this coming weekend for 5 seeds, our Friday, Sunday alignments, or in a future, if BYU, let's say, were to advance as a 5 seed into the Sweet 16 the next weekend, they have all of their alignments essentially have BYU having to play potentially a Friday, Sunday alignment as what would have been their right as a 5 seed. So therefore, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee moved BYU down a seed line and essentially flip-flop places for BYU, where they put Gonzaga in BYU's place, where Gonzaga will play in Salt Lake City at the Delta Center, a place that Mark Pope was very, very clear about in his comments to the media after the selection show went down, that he would have loved to have seen BYU playing. And yes, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee could have overcome this with some foresight to say, okay, BYU is currently being projected as a 5 seed. Where do we need to adjust the bracket here where BYU potentially on 2 different weekends could play a Thursday, Saturday alignment? Yes, they could have fixed that. They didn't do it. So for whatever reason, and Mark Pope said he does not expect to have an explanation come, and obviously I will do my best if I can find a way to get an explanation from the selection committee. I'd be happy to do that. But alas, it is what it is. And now BYU turns their attention to a first-round matchup against the Duquesne Dukes. Now, Duquesne plays in the A-10. They beat Dayton, who BYU is pretty familiar with, to win the A-10 title and therefore get the automatic qualifier spot out of that conference. They are a team that has won a bunch of games of late, 15 of 18, if I recall correctly. I believe it's 8 straight coming into this game against BYU. So they're on a little bit of a heater themselves. But this is also a program, speaking of Duquesne, that has got a really, really long drought of not appearing in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. It's been since 1977. Crazy to think about that. As I am 37 years old, their drought of not making the NCAA tournament is 47 years. So congratulations, first off, to Duquesne on making it into the NCAA tournament. That is no small feat, obviously, when your programs have gone without as long as they have. But the other unique thing about this is now a private university versus private university alignment, as these two schools match up for just the 3rd time in their history. BYU is 0-2 all-time against the Dukes. I believe the matchups came in 1952 and 1992. So not a lot of history between these two programs, but I believe BYU has got a big opportunity to advance here, because a lot of people were crowing on social media about the fact that how in the world does Duquesne end up as an 11 seed? Well, I've got us thinking there's like talking about BYU getting dropped down a seed line because of their no Sunday play policy. I think maybe, just maybe, and this is the conspiracy theorist in me, maybe the NCAA tournament selection committee said, okay, if we're dropping BYU a seed line and we are sending them away from their preferred destination in Salt Lake City, maybe we give them an opponent on paper who may be just a little bit overseeded, and that would be Duquesne as an 11 seed. Now, the Dukes have a two-guard lineup that is their leading scorers. I will freely admit I have watched zero basketball of Duquesne's this season, so I'm not going to pretend to be some expert on them. I'll endeavor to do my best to maybe bring somebody on to talk about them in the lead up to this game on Thursday. But according to their stats, Day Grant, which is a great name, by the way, he is their leading scorer with 16.9 points per game. And then Jimmy Clark III, his backcourt running mate, averaging 15.3 points per game. So they've got two guys who can fill it up on the score sheet from the guard position. But that's something I think BYU very much relishes, because this is an opportunity for BYU to go out there and win a first-round game. This is a BYU basketball program, as I mentioned, that has got that dubious honor of being the program that has made the most NCAA tournaments without a Final Four appearance. Now, be it far from me to predict BYU making a Final Four run this season, but the Cougars have the ability to essentially beat anybody placed in front of them on this bracket right now. I really think that it's a big opportunity for BYU, but it obviously starts with Duquesne. We'll break into more of what BYU could expect should they advance on Thursday. But the other thing about this is this is a matchup that features two Fusenis on either team. Fuseni Drame, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is their fourth leading scorer. Speaking of the Dukes, he averages 6.8 points per game, 5.5 rebounds for Duquesne, and obviously Fuseni Traore for BYU is one of BYU's key pieces in the front court. And this is a Duquesne team that is not extremely large in terms of their overall size on the roster. So that should favor BYU. The other thing I think that favors BYU in this matchup is the fact that the Cougars just went through an absolute gauntlet of the Big 12 schedule. It's crazy to me that only 8 of those teams from the Big 12 got into the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Oklahoma got a little bit of a screw job due to some bid thieves late in the process, and they were the first team out. And they actually said to heck with it. They actually declined an NIT berth, which they could have played in. So their season is over. I thought they were very much a team that should have been in. There were 6 teams from the Mountain West Conference. And if you were to ask me about some of those teams on the back end of what the Mountain West got in, I'm thinking of the New Mexicos, the Boise States, etc. I'd probably pick the Oklahoma Sooners. That probably is the Big 12 homer in me, having watched a lot more Big 12 basketball this season than anything else. But alas, BYU will look to do their conference proud, obviously make the program proud of themselves by advancing in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, where in theory they would advance and potentially face off against the 4-seed Illinois, which is an interesting, 3-seed Illinois. I apologize. 3-seed Illinois in that matchup. And I'm not 100% convinced that BYU couldn't beat Illinois. That's a very, very tough matchup. But if you were to pull that off, there is a Sweet 16 berth out there potentially with you matching up against the Iowa State Cyclones. Yes, BYU's Big 12 rivals who they had on the ropes on senior night out there in Ames. They are the 2-seed in this bracket. So you look at it, it's not necessarily a doomsday scenario for BYU. Let's just say they make that dream run there to the Elite 8. You're potentially facing off against who? UConn, who is one of the top seeds. If not, are they the top seed? I don't recall correctly. Maybe they were, but you'd have a really, really tough matchup there. But the dream is there. That's the best part about this. BYU can look at this and try and prognosticate how they go about things. Mark Pope was very clear that there's not a ton of familiarity with the Duquesne Dukes, and that's kind of the nature of this when it comes to the NCAA men's basketball tournament. You have to familiarize yourself very quickly with your opponent, and then you have to get after it. BYU spent Sunday with some boosters and the like, obviously watching things go down. We had a chance to sit down with them via Zoom as a media corps to talk with them shortly after they learned where they'll be playing. And there's an excitement factor because of the fact that BYU's back in the NCAA men's basketball tournaments. The second time officially in Mark Pope's tenure. Had the 2020 NCAA tournament not been canceled due to COVID, that would have been his third. And I believe that was a team that got absolutely screwed out of what I think could have been a very, very special run. But this team, it has the tools, the three-point shooting, if it comes and BYU catches fire here in Omaha when they face off against Duquesne and potentially against the likes of Illinois, or if Morehead State pulls off a massive upset, BYU could make themselves a darling of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. You got great storylines with guys like Richie Saunders, who just is a do-everything player. I think Khalifa with his passing, should his ankle hold up, there's a big question mark, obviously, leading into this game about his health status. But there are a lot of reasons why BYU could become an NCAA tournament darling, but they have to take care of business first, and that starts on Thursday against the Duquesne Dukes at 10:40 a.m. Mountain Time. Tip for the Cougars. So they're one of the first teams out of the chute when it comes to the NCAA tournament. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can get out there. Teams, not teams, but teams will be watching, but other fans will be out there watching. And it's very easy for BYU to potentially become, like I said, that darling. Now, they are playing on True TV, which seems to be the one network everybody starts scrambling around on their TV guide to find this time of year. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but very much looking forward to it, and we will get you ready as it gets a little bit closer with more thoughts as I learn a little bit more about the Duquesne Dukes. But coming up in here in just a minute, let's talk a little bit more about the overall bracket in terms of BYU being in the East region. How do things shake out? Should the Cougars advance? Where are the pitfalls for BYU? We'll talk about all that as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week we're picking one team that stands out above the rest, a team that's pushed it further than anybody else, just like all of the new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. Let's start off with the Tennessee Volunteers, can be only described as a pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC. Player of the Year candidate Dalton Necht has led the Vols all season long, made them a team to watch in March, just like everybody else. BYU, obviously, they mentioned that I believe they could be a tournament darling. Well, Tennessee has kind of got that same type of allure to them. But like I mentioned, Pathfinder, that's exactly what they are. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure with the NCAA tournament here, my friends. It's a great time of year to be a sports fan, but also if you're in the mode of trying to find a new vehicle, check out our friends over at Nissan. That go to nissanusa.com to learn more. That's shop nissanusa.com. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Amazon Fire TV. Now, Fire TV is a must for this time of year, my friends, for your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV is offering great viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV 6 allows you to plug it into your existing TV, give you access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as all the free and live TV that you can handle, my friends. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball upcoming, the men's basketball college tournament, which is upcoming this weekend, you're going to want to have Fire TV as an option for you. They recently created the Fire TV Channels app to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands. All of it, they do it for free, my friends. That includes all of us here at the Locked On Podcast Network. You can get all of our videos on the Amazon Fire TV Channels app. So check it out. All the big pro leagues and college conferences are also on there as well. It allows you to dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, or cooking videos as well if you have interest in those. So check out Fire TV Channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices today. If you've not checked it out, I would encourage you to do so. Trust me on this. It's a great feature. Go to amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV to learn more now. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being everydayers with us right here on the podcast. I want to remind you guys that we have the new Locked On College Bracket Breakdown show that is launching on the Locked On College Basketball channel. It's a really, really great way to get up to speed on the overall bracket. If you're trying to fill it out for a pool that you're in with your family, friends, or at work, whatever it is, get the inside edge. Get our experts here at Locked On with their inside knowledge of all things college basketball. That's the Locked On College Bracket Breakdown, part of the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Get it wherever you get your podcast. It's also available on YouTube and also the free Fire TV Channels app. I would encourage you guys to check it out right away. All right, let's talk about BYU and the overall bracket here for BYU. The Cougars are slated in the East region, and it's a big opportunity for the Cougars to go out there and make noise. The men's basketball program at BYU wants nothing more than to make some history. I talked about it last week on the podcast. If this team were to lose in the first round, it kind of goes kind of over in the pile of teams that had really, really good regular seasons, but couldn't get it done in the postseason. March is when memories are made. And that alliteration, I get it's kind of funny, but it exists for a reason. If you want to be remembered, remember Danny Ainge and his dash to glory against Notre Dame to lead BYU to the Elite Eight. Jimmer Fredette back in 2011, the last time BYU advanced in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, he led them to the Sweet 16 and had Brandon Davies not been suspended. I think it's a very, very real possibility they go to the Elite Eight and potentially the Final Four that season. That bracket was that busted open when BYU got there. But you know what? Things happen. And BYU, frankly, the history outside of that is a lot of maybe one and done, or they advance to the round of 32 and then they're done. So this is a big weekend for the BYU men's basketball program. If they punch their ticket to the Sweet 16 and are potentially playing a week from Thursday in the Sweet 16 against potentially Iowa State, that would essentially, I think, seal up that this is one of the greatest seasons in BYU men's basketball history. I said it last week. I believe it was one of the great regular seasons of BYU men's basketball history. And I still believe it's one of the great seasons, period, because BYU entered the Big 12, which is the best basketball conference in the country. It's far and away the best conference BYU's ever been in. It's probably the top to bottom, the toughest slate of games they have played conference-wise at any point in their basketball history, and they thrived, frankly, against it. They absolutely did what they needed to do. They were the 5 seed in the Big 12 tournament, a team that was picked 13th out of 14 teams in the NCAA tournament. 7 other compatriots made the NCAA tournament field. If I recall correctly, 3 others are going to play in the NIT with Cincinnati, UCF, and I don't remember who else it was, but there was one other one, and I apologize. I probably should have that pulled up. But the bigger thing is that BYU has a big opportunity here. Now, you also, as a higher seed, carry a big target on your back. Duquesne, as I mentioned, has not been in the NCAA tournament since 1977. There are thousands, I would imagine, of alumni from Duquesne University who have lived their lives and have never seen the Dukes in the NCAA tournament. They are going to be rooting for their Dukes to do what they hope they can do and pull off an upset for BYU. A couple of you mentioned on our Locked On Cougars Insider group, well, hey, BYU may have been slated as a 5 seed, but dropping to the 6 seed means they avoid that dreaded 12-5 cursed matchup. Now, here's the thing. The history suggests that 6-11 matchups are almost just as common in the NCAA tournament, but it kind of, there's like this moniker, always pick a 12 over a 5, if not 2 of them when you fill out your bracket. I get all that, but BYU's got great odds to make a run here. And I think that even if you advance potentially past Duquesne into the round of 32, and you should find yourself in a dogfight against Illinois, who won the Big Ten title. They won that right before the brackets were revealed on CBS. That would, I still think, if you were to win one game and then drop out in the round of 32, I still think that puts this season for BYU overall in the top 10 at the very worst of all-time seasons. Now, like I said, if you make it to the Sweet 16, well, that makes it one of the top 2, 3, 5 at the very worst seasons in BYU men's basketball history. Yes, there are those ones of way back when BYU won the NIT title, when it was a much bigger deal than it is now. And the funny thing about that is, some have pointed out, BYU won the NIT in the very next week where they're actually playing in the NCAA tournament. So it's a different era, obviously. In the NCAA tournament, the 68 teams in this field, they are considered the top teams of the season. I know that there are ranked teams out there that missed out. Illinois State is obviously going to be perturbed. Oklahoma, who I already mentioned, already turned down an NIT bid because I think they're a little bit miffed about missing out on the big dance. But BYU's in the field. So the opportunity exists for BYU to go make some history. And that's what Mark Pope's got to be preaching to his guys. Guys, we go out there, we show them what we're capable of, and we are underseeded. They might be a little bit overseeded, but let's go leave no doubt. Our friends over at FanDuel have BYU, I think it opened up as a 7.5-point favorite. I think I saw it right before I pushed record, move up to 8 points. So BYU is expected to win this game rather handily. And looking at Duquesne and their overall statistics, they shoot the 3 at a pretty high clip, 34% as a team overall in the season. But as I mentioned, the size for them is not all that crazy. Now, I did I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier. Some of you may remember the name Dusan Mahorcic, who was a guy that he has had a lengthy, crazy career. Because as many of you might recall, this is a guy. I've got to pull this up here. I'm pulling this up as I'm doing this. I should have pulled this up earlier, but his career actually included him making a not necessarily an overture, but BYU making overtures to him to come and play for the BYU Cougars at one point. Remember, he was that guy that ultimately signed with Utah and spent a season there. And when it was asked about why he didn't pick BYU, he said, I wasn't going to live the honor code. I just wasn't interested in that. He has played now, this is his fourth program. He's played for Duquesne, NC State, Utah, and the Illinois State Redbirds. And I believe it was when he was at Illinois State is when he ultimately was flirting with BYU. But it's kind of funny how storylines come back around where a guy like Mahorcic is now going to face off against a team that once upon a time he was being recruited by. And according to some of the reports, he very much gave BYU a chance to sell him on what BYU had. But like I said, it's just kind of funny, these storylines that come out. But the bigger thing is, the bigger picture pulling back from just this Duquesne matchup is that BYU, if they really want to seal this season as one of the all-timers, you got to go make noise. And that is easier said than done, obviously. But I think this is a big opportunity. And the Cougars, you got to believe that they are smarting a little bit from that the job that they did, well, not the job, but the beatdown they absorbed from Texas Tech. Now, they did rally late in that game, got it to 7 points. And yes, when you yank Jaxson Robinson, kind of what you did with Trevin Nell against Cincinnati in the first Big 12 game of the season, it makes you kind of skin crawl a little bit. Like, why aren't you just riding that pony into the ground, to use that metaphor? You know what? Mark Pope can only answer for that. But this team right now, based on what I heard from Mark Pope and Jaxson Robinson, you can tell that they're motivated. They want to go out there and do their thing, and they want to obviously be able to celebrate the season as long as possible. They want to keep playing together. And here's the thing. There's only one team that ultimately is on top at the end of all this. And that obviously necessitates that teams are going to absorb losses. But if you go one and done here for BYU, I think it'd be a pretty disappointing end to an otherwise great season for BYU. You got to beat Duquesne. Then you roll the dice against the higher seeded Illinois squad. And then obviously, if you were to make it to the Sweet 16, as I mentioned, I think that is still signed, sealed, and delivered as one of the all-time great seasons. But hey, you're playing with house money at that point because you're the underseeded team. And that is where you got to take some I keep saying the 4 seed for Illinois, but it's the 3 seed. I apologize. But the bigger thing is that BYU has to go out there and prove what they're made of. This is a team that a lot of people have panned to the side and said they are upset fodder because they shoot the 3 at such a high clip. And when they're off, they can be upset. Yes, that absolutely could exist. But I think this BYU team, with a week's worth of preparation, resting up, and obviously honing their game plan for Duquesne, I'm feeling pretty confident about BYU's chances to go and beat the Dukes and obviously make it to the round of 32. And then we'll see what happens beyond that. All right. Coming up here in just a minute, we'll finish up today's show, flipping back over to football. The BYU men's football program, the BYU football program got a big commit over the weekend, announced that on Sunday, kind of amidst all the other stuff going on with Selection Sunday. Who is Blake Bryce and what does he bring to the BYU football program? We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your business, you want to be able to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you guys need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and, more importantly, do it for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board, my friends. It is a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. I think all of us, if you're not on LinkedIn, you probably should be at this point in your life. But nonetheless, it is the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is super easy when you have that many quality candidates available to you guys. So easy that, in fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of their job posting on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. So you want to encourage you guys, if you have a need for that, do it today. Post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post that job for free. Once again, terms and conditions apply. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Utah Community Credit Union. Now, Utah Community Credit Union has elevated their checking accounts by enhancing them with more benefits, more savings, and more online protections than ever before. A lot more. Paired with the most advanced and comprehensive mobile banking tools, Elevated Checking is a must-have financial product packed with lifestyle, security, and financial benefits. The best part is the lifestyle benefits alone include cell phone protection, roadside assistance, telehealth with 24/7 access to licensed health professionals with zero copay, and also exclusive savings on travel, shopping, and dining. Think about that. It's an incredible list of all kinds of features, but there are, like, it feels like a gazillion more that are available to you guys. And the best part is Elevated Checking is free when you do any one of the following. Use your credit or debit card 15 times or more a month. Have a $500 direct deposit or more every single month into your account at UCCU, or maintain an average daily balance of $1,500. Otherwise, UCCU's Elevated Checking is just $6 a month. Visit uccu.com to open an Elevated Checking account online, or stop by any branch in person to open that account as well. It's all courtesy of your friends at Utah Community Credit Union. Love where you bank. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I would encourage you guys, if you have not done so already, please consider subscribing to our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to get interaction with the show. BYU football has a practice later on this afternoon. If you want my updates live as I'm standing there on the field watching BYU football, you can join us today. 14-day free trial, $5 a month afterwards. We're having a lot of fun chopping it up. It literally comes to you guys via text messages that come directly to your phone. You can fire back with your questions as well and get live updates from myself, and obviously ask questions in real time as well. Would encourage you guys to sign up today. That's our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Find the link below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and join us today. All right, so BYU football got a commitment over the weekend, and that is Blake Bryce out of Newbury Park High School in Newbury Park, California. 6'5", 228 pounds. And I think it would be shocking for you to hear that he's another tight end that BYU's added, who is a highly rated prospect. He's a 3-star currently, according to 24/7 Sports, but it's still fairly early on in the 2025 recruiting cycle, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a ratings bump from his obviously his play for Newbury Park in his senior season upcoming. But he pulled the trigger for BYU, and this is a guy, his dad Gary played for BYU in the early 2000s, and ultimately decided that he wanted to follow his father's footsteps. Speaking of Blake, to come and play for the Cougars. And here's the thing: this is not just a BYU legacy. Picking BYU as a foregone conclusion. He had offers from Arizona State, Cal, Minnesota. You can go down the list at the programs that offered Blake Bryce. But the other thing about this, the other important, I think, thing to point out here is that this is the first tight end prospect that BYU has committed since they made the transition from Steve Clark to now having Kevin Gilbride, take over as BYU tight ends coach. So it shows that Kevin Gilbride's got some recruiting chops. Obviously, Kalani Sitake, Aaron Roderick, and the other coaches on the offensive staff, I'm sure, played a role in terms of helping him commit to BYU. But as I mentioned, Kansas, Duke, NC State, Louisville, Stanford, UCLA. We're talking, this is a national prospect, speaking of Blake Bryce, and decided that BYU is where he wants to be, and he did it on a pretty short notice, it felt like. I don't proclaim to be the recruiting expert that Jeff Hansen is over at Cougar Sports Insider, but everything I had read and heard about Blake Bryce was that he was going to kind of go through the process, kind of evaluate his options, and then may pull the trigger. But he ultimately decided that BYU is where he wants to be, and I can respect that. He joins Tyler Payne as one of just two prospects who have committed to BYU as part of the 2025 recruiting cycle. But the good news is both of them are guys who are high-level 3-star right now athletes with the potential to rise even higher in the recruiting rankings. And the good news is they're already in for BYU. And I think that's a great start to the recruiting cycle for the BYU football program. Watching Bryce's highlights is that I like this kid. This kid's not necessarily maybe as smooth as I've made out a guy like Reiner Swanson to be. But one thing I love about Blake Bryce is he's playing both sides of the ball at Newbury Park. If you watch his highlights, you go on Huddle, you'll see him playing defensive end as well as tight end. And I think he brings some defensive mentality in terms of his overall just attacking defensive players when he plays tight end. I think that's the position that he is slated to play for BYU at 6'5", 228. But I guess the versatility is there should a tight end not work out for him. BYU could flip him over to defensive end and see how he works out there. But I think that he brings a lot to the table. He shows the ability to be a willing blocker on his tape. This is not a kid who is just running routes all the time, catching passes. In fact, you kind of watch the way he plays. He plays a pretty physical style of football. And I can respect that. And I think this shows that Kevin Gilbride is not dropping the ball when it comes to recruiting tight ends for BYU. I remember a lot of people, a lot of listeners, when Steve Clark was let go, was like, oh, BYU is going to pay the price in recruiting. They're not going to be able to recruit these guys. They're going to lose out on guys. Well, so far they haven't done it. And Blake Bryce ultimately decided that BYU is where he wants to be. So I think this is a solid pickup for BYU, and I think the Cougars are going to be are going to benefit from having some of these great tight ends in this system. Think about it. Reiner Swanson's already doing his thing. We've seen flashes in spring camp. I've mentioned this to our Locked On Cougars insider group. We've seen flashes of seeing some of the other tight ends show capability in BYU's offense more so than they have in the recent past when it was really kind of the Isaac Rex show. So the nice part is if you bring in more talent at that tight end position, you're putting 1, 2, maybe 3 tight ends at points on the field. And the nice part is you're not necessarily lacking for much athleticism. And frankly, you're probably better in the blocking department in theory as well. So I think it's a very solid pickup for the Cougars, and obviously looking forward to seeing how Blake develops in his final season as a high school athlete, and then obviously on into his time as a BYU Cougar. Now, a couple of notes. I had a chance to catch up. I'm just going to extend time here for a minute here on the podcast. I had a chance to catch up with one of our Locked On Cougars insiders talking about BYU's scrimmage from Saturday. I wanted to get some insight on how things went for BYU. Their evaluation was that BYU's offense won the day, and if you watch the highlights that came out from BYU, a lot of offensive highlights. I saw a really, really nice touchdown where Devin Downing mossed a defensive back on a throw from Ryder Burton. So it was good to see Ryder Burton, by the way, get some time in BYU's offense. Saw some nice things from LJ Martin as a running back, but kind of the consensus in terms of the conversation I had with this insider was that the offense won the day, but he added the caveat that BYU held out a bunch of their top-level defensive players. Think about guys like Tyler Batty, Ephraim Asiata, who's been an early star during his time at BYU as a true freshman. He was not in that. So some of the top defensive players for BYU were not participating in this scrimmage, but don't necessarily buy too much into the overall outcome of the scrimmage. Spring is a time, as this person also cautioned me, it's a time for development. You're putting guys in new positions, running new schemes, running new plays, and seeing what sticks, seeing what guys are capable of doing. And then you kind of redeploy things in the offseason. Speaking of the summer, I guess I should say, in terms of altering the scheme and saying, okay, that play worked in spring. We'll add that to the rotation in terms of our play sheet. That one did not work. We'll take that out. So some good signs from BYU offense based on what I was hearing, but also all of you want to know about the quarterback battle. This person, and I've talked to them for quite a while, says it's very much still a 50-50 deal, and I expected that to be the answer. When I asked the question, like, what's the quarterback battle look like? It's 50-50. It's right down the middle. Well, you know what? Gary Bohannon and Jake Retzloff are going to compete until game week of Southern Illinois in late August. If Aaron Roderick walks out at the end of spring camp, says, you know what? We're declaring whether it's Gary or Jake as our starting quarterback, I will probably fall over dead. That I just do not expect that to happen for BYU. And like I said, the conversation I had is it's still very much a 50-50 proposition for BYU. But one person to keep an eye on, this person did mention, is that on the offensive side of the football, I've been talking about it, but they kind of reiterated it. Reiner Swanson is a guy that is absolutely going to be a player for BYU this fall. He is too good of an athlete, too smooth. He looks like a college junior out there. And it's crazy to consider that. He's only 17 years old, but this is a well put together athlete, and he has a head on his shoulders, apparently IQ wise, that is years more advanced than his 17-year-old overall age would lead you to believe. So there are some really, really exciting things for BYU, but also at the same time, I'll reiterate it once again, it is spring ball. So trying to make hard and fast judgments and saying that this is how it's going to be for BYU as a result of spring ball, it's a fool's errand, because there is still a transfer portal period to come, and you can guarantee BYU will be active in that portal as they try to probably add, I think, at least 1 or 2 offensive linemen. And speaking of offensive linemen, I am expected to talk with Connor Pay tonight. So another edition of the Connor Pay Show right here on Locked On Cougars coming at you tomorrow if everything goes according to plan. So once again, that'll do it for this edition of the podcast. A big thank you to all of you for your support as always. Cannot thank you guys enough for being a part of it, being everydayers with us here on the podcast, and obviously making it your first listen of the day. Until tomorrow, as we talk with Connor Pay, hopefully we will talk to you guys again soon. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.